Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternities, a perfect episode number 9. G'day Melbourne, The Leftovers. This video is a part of a series of videos where I do a deep dive analysis of episodes that I believe to be near perfect, episodes that are amongst my favorite episodes from all my favorite shows that I feel maybe I didn't analyze as well before and I wanted to do a bigger analysis of, and that I feel deserve more attention. And so, in this video, I will cover the Season 3 episode of The Leftovers, G'day Melbourne. Now, when I first decided I wanted to do this a perfect episode series, I knew that I needed to have an episode from The Leftovers in this series because The Leftovers has always been one of my favorite shows, and it's one of the most underrated shows ever to exist, along with The Expanse. And so it's definitely something I wanted to highlight and do a deep dive analysis on. But the problem came when trying to decide which episode to choose from The Leftovers, because my first choice, the most natural choice, was the most powerful man in the world and his identical twin brother, which I included in I think it made my top 5 of favorite episodes of all time. If not top 5, maybe it was number 6, but it was up there, and to me that would be the most logical episode to do for this series. However, when that episode first came out, I already did a very thorough, very deep dive analysis of that episode. That video was an hour and 15 minutes long, so I feel like I have already thoroughly covered that episode, and really the point of this series is to cover episodes that I haven't really covered that in depth before, so that kind of ruled that episode out. So then I had a lot of different options. I was thinking about the other episode that's similar to The Most Powerful Man in the World, and that is the one that did it first, the afterlife thingy first, International Assassin. Now, that did do it first, so it made it more shocking because you had no idea what would happen after Kevin drank poison and died, and it was very shocking to get this really abstract, weird episode that I do think was great, but I don't think it was quite as good as The Most Powerful Man in the World. And I feel like if I covered that episode, since I already covered The Most Powerful Man in the World, I would be treading over very similar ground. So then I went back to Season 2, because Season 2 is my favorite season of The Leftovers, and I thought, well, what about the finale? The final episode, because there's a scene in particular where Kevin goes back to the afterlife and he has to sing a Simon Garfunkel song in order to get back to his real life, which I thought was one of the most powerful scenes I've ever seen in any show. But the problem with choosing the finale of Season 2 is that there are a couple scenes that I think are absolutely horrendous, like involving the townspeople that lived outside of Miracle, those weird, people living in trailers and whatnot. And there was one scene in particular I thought was the worst of the entire, most pretentious of the entire season, where this random woman goes up to Nora and be's like, "That's not your baby." That seemed very unrealistic and outside. Very those the writers speaking to me. It's very pretentious. So I really, really hated that scene so much. So it would be hard for me to call that episode perfect if it includes a scene that I really think is awful. So that ruled that out. So then I went back to Season 3. And really, I didn't really consider the finale. Now that I'm thinking about it, maybe I could have done the finale, the series finale, final episode. But again, even though I think the beginning and end of that episode is extremely powerful, the middle's kind of boring. It kind of drags on for too long. And again, with pretentious imagery and stuff like that. So I ultimately came to G'day Melbourne, which I wouldn't say is one of my favorite. It is my favorite episode of The Leftovers. That would probably go more to these other episodes I mentioned, but it is one of my favorite episodes of The Leftovers. It's and more than that, this episode features one of the most powerful breakup scenes I've seen in any show or movie ever. And in fact, the whole episode is really a downward slope to this relationship falling apart, which it does. And I will be honest, I try not to get too personal in my YouTube videos, but it does have personal connotations for me, having been through a divorce. In fact, right when our marriage was falling apart, we took a trip from New Zealand, where we were living, to the U.S., and the trip was horrible because I could tell how distant she was being, and when I tried to inquire, she would, denied. But basically, she was, contemplating leaving me at that point. And so I feel connection to this episode, because when Kevin and Nora their interactions reminded me so much of what I went through, is that their relationship is falling apart, and Kevin in particular does not want to admit it. And also, of course, this episode deals with other issues such as insanity, and a great character story for both Kevin and Nora. So I landed on this episode to cover for my perfect episode series, because it is actually one of the best episodes of a really great show. So we begin the episode with the opening credits, the opening scene, and so season 3 was doing a thing where we'd share the images, the same images of the opening intro that we got in season 2. However, week to week they would change the song that would be playing during the credits. So every episode would have a different song, different music to go along with these images, and this week it was a song called "This Love Is Over," which was the chorus of the song. So that really sets the stage for what this episode is going to be about. It's going to be a breakup episode. And also, I would say it sets the stage more because it's a really somber song that's played over very happy, lighthearted images. Now, the thing about the images of the credits for both season 2 and 3 is that they're people being very happy, photos of people being very happy and going out and stuff, but there's like outlines of one of the people or multiple people in the images are like blank, and meant to sort of emphasize that these are the people that departed. So even though they're outwardly happy images, they have that tinge of disturbedness or that tinge of sadness to it. And I find that really perfectly describes this episode, because this episode, it has very sort of lighthearted settings. You see a guy dressed up in like a koala bear outfit in the middle of the street and stuff, and it's very and the happy, upbeat morning show and whatnot. So it's very sort of lighthearted setting. However, the tone of it is very dark and somber, and so I think this is a great way to sort of set up for this episode. So we begin the episode proper with Kevin and Nora checking in at security at the airport in Austin for their trip to Australia, and we see that Nora asks if she can go through the global access line because she has global access through security, and to which she says, the agent says yes, but then Kevin asks to go with her, and the agent asks him if he has global access, which he says he doesn't, but he's a cop, but apparently that's not good enough for her, and she tells him that he can't go with her. Now you can see the look on his face, that he obviously is not very happy to be separated from her. And earlier the agent asked if they were together, and they kind of stumbled and look at each other and like, oh yeah, we're together. So these are all signs of that their relationship is in trouble, and that Kevin can kind of tell on some level that it is, and so he's wanting to stay with Nora, but she's purposely doesn't care and wants to separate. Now, she goes through security, and they're playing this like really funky music to indicate that Nora's kind of like getting her kicks out of this, and we find out why. It's because she's smuggling all this money, because you're only allowed to bring a certain amount of money, and so she had taped it to her, and that's why she wanted to go through the global access line, so that they wouldn't scan her, because then they would be able to see it. And that she's getting thrill out of going through security without being caught, where someone else, we see that someone else is yelling that he's been caught and he has his things confiscated. And then so Kevin meets up with her, and he's, very smart, and so he immediately says to her, "What are you smuggling?" And she reveals what it is, and she goes into the bathroom, locks the door, and Kevin helps her take the money off of her that was strapped to her. And he simply asks, "Well, why didn't you just give me half the money?" Because apparently if they each took half, that would have been fine. And her only response is to go, "Huh." So that shows a couple things, that she's really not thinking of Kevin at all, and she's only thinking of herself, and she's not thinking of them as a team. And also, I think she wanted the thrill. She was looking forward to having the thrill of smuggling something. And then because she does get a huge kick out of it, and they do have sex in the bathroom right then and there, but there was very dark and ominous music is being played over their sex scene that kind of indicate that this sex is very hollow, and there's no sort of feelings behind it, and it's all just about thrills for Nora, which is very ominous. So a very ominous way to start the episode. So then we see them on the plane, and Nora is explaining to Kevin the reasoning behind her trip to Australia, which Kevin at the last moment asked to accompany her just for the hell of it. I think he was hoping to re-spark their relationship, which of course is not what is going to happen. So she's explaining the reason for her trip, and that she's investigating a group of people who are claiming to send people over to wherever those departed went, where nobody knows where that is. But Nora is a claims investigator, so she is, telling Kevin that she is going to bust them, and that most likely the people that think they're going to wherever the people who departed went are just being incinerated. But when Kevin points out that she does not have jurisdiction in Australia, she kind of shrugs it off and is like, "Well, whatever." And when Kevin asks why she didn't report this to her agency overall and let them handle it, she makes up an excuse of the agency having too much on their hands. So it's very obvious to Kevin that something is up, and that she's not being completely truthful. So then Kevin asks her, because Nora tells him that the people who she's investigating seem to know everything about her, and Kevin then says, "Oh, they must know about me," and Nora says, "Yes, they do." So then Kevin asks her how she's going to explain him accompanying her to Australia, and she says that she'll simply tell them that they're in a toxic, codependent relationship, and they both need out. And it's obvious that, and I love the look that Kevin gives her after she says this, because it says it all. Because she's just playing it off as like, "Oh yeah, I'll just make up some bullshit lie," but it's kind of obvious to Kevin that she actually believes that is not so much a lie, and that part of him sees that she believes it. Maybe part of him actually believes it as well. And so that was a very clever scene. I absolutely love that. So next we see them arrive in Australia in the hotel room, and Nora asks Kevin if he's going to look up his dad, because his father has been in Australia for quite some time. However, Kevin says that he has no interest in looking up his dad, and when Nora presses the issue, he says He tells her that if his dad wanted to see him, he would have fucking told him where he was, which kind of gives Nora the impression to kind of back off, and then Kevin insists that he's there to be with her. So this is kind of indicating Nora's kind of wanting to be alone and kind of wanting to Kevin to go off and do his own thing, but Kevin is being very clingy to her and saying that he just wants to be there for her, but it's kind of obvious from the way that she's reacting that she doesn't want him to. So then she brings up, very casually and nonchalant, she brings up the book. Now, this is a book that her brother, who's a priest, wrote about Kevin and his experiences with the afterlife, and that happened in season 2, and it tries to present itself as like the new Bible and Kevin as the new savior, something that Kevin's not at all happy about. And she's very nonchalant and reads from it and asks Kevin what happens next, and reads like a part where he went with this little girl to the well, and she asks him what happens next, and he says that he pushed her in. And then we see a very clip from the episode in season 2 where he did in fact push a girl into the well in the afterlife. It was a really nice touch, just like a really brief clip to show that Kevin actually experienced this and feels like this actually happened, while Nora says, oh, how does Matt come up with this shit? Now, it's kind of obvious here that she's not happy with him about this book and kind of being passive aggressive about it. But he's trying to ignore this. So then Nora gets a call from these quote-unquote scammers telling her to be at a certain, take a certain bus, and that if she misses the bus, then she'll never see them. So Nora goes to leave suddenly in order to catch the bus, and asks Kevin if he is going. Kevin asks her if he wants her to come with her, and she of course says no. And then she starts to leave, and then realizes, she's like, are you gonna follow me, Kevin? He's like, yeah. And she's like, no, please don't. Like, I just need to do this by myself. And again, it's showing how sort of clingy he is being to her. And he has a tendency to do his own thing, and you know, his police tendencies and whatnot, so kind of knew that he might do that. But she does convince him to stay behind. So after Nora leaves, the TV in Kevin's hotel room turns on, and he can't get it to turn off, so he calls the front desk and asks them about it, and they said that their TVs are plugged into the wall and automatic, and sometimes they break, and so that they're going to reset the TV for him. So he goes and looks at Matt's book that he wrote about him and starts flipping through the book, and it appears that he did not, in fact, read it as he claimed to Nora. However, he knew what was in it because it was what he had told Matt and what he had experienced. And we see like clips from various episodes in season 2 that describe the events of his seeing Patty going insane and going to an old man to cure him, and the old man just told him to drink poison, to which he did, and then died and went into the afterlife. And then when he looks up at the TV, which is playing a morning show called Good Day Melbourne, where he sees people chatting away, and they mention that there is an American tourist who's been missing for over a month named Kevin Garvey, which of course is his father. So he's quite shocked to learn that his father had gone missing. But then shortly thereafter, in one of their routines with the chef or something, where there's a bunch of people gathered outside the window of this morning show, and one of them appears to be Evie, who is the daughter of his good friend John, and a girl who had died previously I think a couple years ago, after she had joined the Guilty Remnant, a cult that sort of insists that there is no family. And she's standing outside this window, which seems impossible to him, and so he stares at the TV and speaks to it and says, "Are you watching me?" So almost like she's looking directly at him and he can speak to her. But then the TV suddenly turns off, so he freaks out, thinking this is a vision of some kind, and so calls the front desk again and demands that they turn the TV back on. But they apologize and said that they're resetting the TV and they can't turn it back on. He then asks him if Good Day Melbourne is being shot live, and they confirm that it is, and he asks where. And so then we see him run out of the hotel room, jump in a cab furiously, obviously going to the set of Good Day Melbourne. Now, here's something interesting that I love about season 3 in particular, and this episode in particular, is that it's very ambiguous to whether or not the weird shit happen is actually mystical or supernatural in nature, or if it's just normal happenstance that the main characters are misinterpreting, and it's just actually they're seeing, magic or visions or meaning where there's none. And that, I think that made it different than season 2, because season 2 I felt was leaning more towards telling you this is like weird, magical, mystical stuff, because how could Kevin die and then be dead and buried and then come back to life and crawl his way out of the grave, only to be shot and killed a few hours later and once again come back to life. So I think season 2 was leaning a lot more heavily towards, yeah, this is weird, mystical, fantasy stuff that's actually happening. Whereas season 3, I feel like, leaves it really ambiguous and up to the audience to decide that really it could go either way. Now, there's some cases that I think is more clearly just a delusion. Like in the previous episode, we followed Kevin's father, who saw all these mystic signs and listening to chickens or something, and that told him that he had to save the world. And I think that episode was making it crystal clear, and this is reinforced by the end of the season, that he's actually insane, or at least not making stuff up and looking for signs and mysticism where there isn't any. But then there's other parts, like when Kevin returns to the afterlife at the end of the season, which again is ambiguous, but I would lean more towards the mysticism side rather than it just being him misinterpreting things. But it still leaves it open for the audience either way. And so here we're introduced to another sort of mysticism storyline of Kevin seeing Evie, who had died, standing right in front of him in Melbourne. So they seem to play it off, and he certainly believes that this is more sort of mysticism that's happening to him, and that is happening for him as some kind of sign. So then we go over to Nora, and while she's waiting at the bus stop for the bus that she must catch in order to meet these people who so-called send people where the people who departed went, a woman with a baby walks up to her, asks her if she's the mother, and she says that she is. So she asks Nora to watch the baby for her, because she has a job interview, and if she goes in with the baby, they'll never hire her, and she desperately needs the job. So Nora, feeling bad for her, agrees to watch the baby, but then sure enough, shortly thereafter, the bus does in fact arrive, and so she's freaking out because she needs to go on the bus, but now she has this baby. So she tells the bus driver to wait for her, and she runs into the building very fast and just tosses the baby back to the mother and yells at the interviewer that it's illegal to discriminate, and then runs back to the bus, which has already started to leave, and she chases the bus down, banging on the door, and is able to get back on. So later in this episode, when she does meet with the people who claim to be able to send people where the departed went. These, scientists. She accuses the scientists of staging this situation as sort of a test, the situation with the baby, and they say that they have no idea what she's talking about. Now, again, this is another thing that I believe is kind of ambiguous and left open to the audience. Was this actually staged by the scientists, or was this just a coincidence and happenstance? And really, honestly, I could see it going either way, because we do know the scientists like kind of toying with her and playing these mind games, and so they tell her that she has to be on this bus, otherwise she's going to miss her chance, and then just so happens this obstacle comes right in her way that kind of has to do with the fact that she's the mother and the baby, which has a lot to do with her intentions of wanting to go where the departed went, because her whole family went there. So I would really see that this could be like something that they would pull to, prove that she really wants to go, which is something that they challenge her on a lot later on the episode. Does she really want to go where the departed went? And so I could see this as being a test of her sort of determination to go, whether she would hold the baby for this woman and miss her one shot, because if she misses the bus, she won't be able to go. But I can honestly see it going the other way as well, that this is just a coincidence, that it had nothing to do, because to be honest, the scientist, when she said, "I have no idea what you're talking about," she seemed sincere. Like, it seemed like, although, again, she could have just been toying with Noir, but it did seem like she was sincere, and this baby thing was just a happy coincidence that had nothing to do with anything. And again, this is something the show never answers, which I kind of like. It makes it more interesting. So then we switch back to Kevin as we see him arrive at the studio where Good Day Melbourne is still being filmed, and they're still doing this segment with the chef, so I guess it didn't take Kevin that long to get there. But anyway, he goes outside the window that's outside that is being filmed and looking for Evie and can't find her. Now, what's important is that he shows up in the filming, which means that's being broadcast, so he shows up on TV, and later this is how his father, Kevin Sr., will find him, because he was watching TV and just so happened to see his son that he had no idea was even in Australia, see him on TV in Melbourne, and this is what allows him to meet up with him. And then the whole end of the season thing happens, where they kill him again and try to get him to send messages from the afterlife. Now, again, this is ambiguous. Was this just a happy coincidence, and or was it meant to be? Was it destiny pushing Kevin? Is that why he saw Evie there? Because destiny was pushing him to be in that spot so that his father could see him, so that he could have that afterlife experience that we see later in the season, or is he just like delusional and it's just a happy coincidence that his father just so happened to be watching the TV, because his father certainly took it as a sign that it was meant to be, but as we know, his father's actually not so, and seeing things that aren't really there and making connections that aren't there. So is it just, it could very well just be a coincidence that people are mistaking for destiny, which makes it interesting. But anyway, Kevin keeps wandering off, and he finds Evie walking down the street, so chases her, yells at her, and asks her what the fuck does she want, why is she bothering him. He thought he finished this, and asked her if Patty sent her. Now, he does interprets seeing someone who's dead as some sort of vision from the afterlife, or because Patty had sort of haunted him, and after she had died, and was like in her head, and he was seeing her everywhere. So I think he believes that the same thing is happening all over again. But Evie turns around and speaks with a strange accent and has no idea who he is, no idea what he's talking about, and says, "Who's Patty?" and insists that he doesn't know her. Now, then another man, quite a muscly, burly man, comes up and says, "Hey, is everything all right?" And he says, "Yeah, I'm fine. Everything's fine." But then he's not talking to him, he's talking to her and says, "Is he bothering you, miss?" And this seems to surprise Kevin that the guy can actually see her, and so it indicates that he thought that she was another vision, another delusion in his mind, and so surprised that someone else can actually see her. And Kevin says that it's okay that he knows her, but she insists again she has no idea who this man is. And Kevin gets very upset and irate and says, "Of course I fucking know." And then the man tries to step in and tells Kevin to back off and leave her alone. Kevin then pushes him away, takes a picture of her, and then the man promptly kicks the shit out of him. So again, this is feeding into this whole storyline of this episode. Is Kevin actually seeing Evie? Is this a vision that's a destiny, or is he just fucking insane? So then we go back to Texas and see Lori, who's Kevin's ex-wife and now married to John, who is Evie's father. And she helps John run these scams on people. But the purpose of the scams is not to make money, but the purpose is to heal people. So he pretends to be a healer who is in touch with the dead, but really Lori's up in the upper levels looking up information on them on the internet and coaching John what to say. And so we see them during one of these sessions. Now, Lori's a very interesting case because she is a psychologist. She's a trained therapist, so she's trained in the ways of helping people deal with mental illness, but she herself went mentally ill and joined a cult, a silent cult, for over a year. And is now helping her husband scam people in order to make them feel better. So she's a bit of a questionable character. Anyway, she receives a phone call from Kevin, who is insisting that he saw Evie in Melbourne, Australia. Now, Lori is, for one, surprised that he's in Australia because he's just up and left without telling anyone. And asks what he's doing there. He explains that he's just there with Nora. So then she asks if Nora knows about how he saw Evie. And he says that she's not here right now. And then proclaims that Evie is alive and that she's going by a different name. And asks Lori to look up this name. So Lori does look it up and then asks if... He saw her at the library, and he deduces, shows she must work at the library. And then Kevin sends her a picture of Evie, and Lori pauses. And even before it was revealed later in the episode, it's obvious to me that this picture was not Evie, but however, Lori confirms to Kevin that it is in order to placate him. And I think... it's obvious that he was placating him, and I think the only reason why he didn't see it is because he's so convinced that this is Evie, and he's sort of wrapped up in his own situation that he can't see it. So, against Lori's wishes, Kevin goes to the library looking for Evie and asks at the front desk for the alias that Evie had given him and pronounces it wrong. And when they ask what he needs her for, he says that she was helping him find a book, and the clerk insists she can help him find the book, and he gets very upset and says he needs her help, and if you could just get her, that'd be fucking great. And of course, him sort of getting upset causes her to call security, who is about to throw him out until Evie sees him and says that it's okay, that she'll talk to him in private. So they go into a private room, and she tells him that she is Evie and that she has a new life and that she needs him to leave her alone because it's her decision to have a new life. Kevin gets really upset, saying that John's his friend and he can't just tell him that she's alive and hiding from him, and asks why she's doing it, and she answers, because there is no family, which is the mantra of the Guilty Remnant. So Kevin gets really upset, slams the door, gets right in her face, and asks her why she's still talking with the accent. This causes her to panic and get really upset, so she starts reciting a prayer and then tells him that she has compassion for him because he's ill. He doesn't know what she's talking about, until she says that a woman had called her and told her to tell him that she was who he thought she was, and because he was ill, in order to help him, and that then he would go away. So he gets upset and asks which woman, and of course it turns out to be Lori, so he calls Lori, very upset, asking why she called her, and told her to tell her that he was ill. And she says that, tries to insist that he go back to the hotel, that he leave her alone, that he goes back to Nora, and that they'll talk later, but that's not good enough for him. He says that John is his friend, and that he should just call John right now to tell him that he's with his daughter. So Lori calls back to the time that Kevin was seeing Patty, and then Kevin says, no, but I'm not seeing Evie. She's right there in front of me. And Lori then goes on to say that what he had mentioned to him when he was seeing Patty was that when someone was in the midst of a psychotic break, you don't tell them they're having a psychotic break, you indulge them, and otherwise they may hurt themselves. And she tells him that she doesn't want him to hurt himself. And so he's confused, so she talks very calmly to him and asks very politely for him to bring up the picture that he took of Evie on his phone. He brings it up, and then she tells him that isn't Evie, that it is just some other woman that he had projected seeing Evie to. He looks at the picture he took on the phone, and sure enough, it's not Evie, it's another woman. And when he looks up, he no longer sees Evie, he sees another woman looking at him sadly. And she can see this revelation that he now realizes that she is not Evie, and then she says that she is going to leave, so she leaves the room. He then continues to talk to Lori, and Lori tells him that he was projecting Evie onto another woman because he understood why Evie did what she did and her need to escape, because he has a need to escape himself. And he says that he denies that, saying he doesn't want to escape. But then she says to him, why did you go to Australia? You're chief of police and there's a major incident that's about to happen in the week that you're needed for, yet you just disappear without telling anyone. And he says that no, he wasn't the one that ran away, nor was the one that ran away. He just came to be with her. She then asks him if he and Nora are okay. And so Lori, being a trained psychologist, definitely picking up on the vibes that him and Nora's relationship is in fact not so good at the moment, something that he's in denial about. So he changes the subject and reveals some information about John that would piss her off, and then hangs up the phone. So yes, this is a very powerful scene. It features the classic leftover music that just fucking hits me every time. So yeah, absolutely amazing. So this scene makes it very clear that this is not Evie, that this is just some other woman, but the ambiguity comes in where is he seeing a vision that's leading him there for a purpose? Is this all leading him to meet up with his father and go to the afterlife? Or is he having a psychotic break like Lori insists? And to be honest, I'm leaning a lot more towards the psychotic break side. But, if you wanted to see mysticism and could say this is destiny or fate or whatever, you could also make the argument there, which is why this is so much brilliant storytelling. So, getting back to the Nora storyline, she arrives at her destination and finds two scientists, Dr. Eden and Dr. Becker. They are both playing on the piano, playing the song Take On Me by Aha, a song that will be played throughout the episode as kind of a motif, which I find kind of cheeky and like creepy at the same time. It's pretty interesting. But anyway, Dr. Eden introduced herself and is very polite, but Dr. Becker is very antagonistic to Nora throughout the whole time, just making snide remarks. And they ask Nora to be examined by a doctor, and a doctor who makes her undress and gives her a very thorough examination, and then puts her in sort of a crate and locks her in a crate in darkness for a certain amount of time, and we find that this is a test to make sure she can handle being in enclosed places because it's required in order to use the machine. And Dr. Eden is impressed because Nora handled it well and her heart rate never got too high. And then Dr. Eden then explains the situation about going through the machine, and meanwhile Dr. Becker is continuing to be antagonistic and making snide remarks, and eventually Dr. Eden asks what her problem was, and she speaks to her in a foreign language that Nora doesn't understand, and so Nora asks to clarify what she just said, and Eden clarifies that she doesn't believe Nora and thinks that she will she's curious about the device, but when it comes to it, will not use it, but that she will get cold feet, and Nora insists that she will not get cold feet. Now, this is interesting because it's setting up for the ambiguity of the finale, the final episode of the show, where Nora tells the story, decades later, she meets up with Kevin, tells him the story about how she used the device, went over to the other world, where in that world, 98% of the population disappeared and the other 2% was there, and she, after years, tracked down her family in New York and found that she just didn't belong there anymore, and then decided to find the creator of the machine who created another machine and sent her back. So the whole show ended with the ambiguity of, was that story bullshit, or did she make it up, or did it actually happen? Now, this is kind of her, Becker saying that she'll have cold feet is kind of setting up for that ambiguity, because when she goes to use the machine, we see her getting ready to call out for something, but the scene stops, so it doesn't clarify whether she did in fact call out to stop. And therefore, so it's setting up that maybe Dr. Becker was correct. Maybe she does in fact get cold feet at the last second and doesn't go through, and therefore the story she tells Kevin at the end is total bullshit. Or maybe Nora is right in saying that she will not get cold feet, and maybe she did go through to the machine and the story she told Kevin was correct. So a beautiful setup here, setting up for the ambiguity of the final episode. So anyway, Nora then, Dr. Eden then tells Nora that she has one last question, and Nora's like, oh, is it about Kevin? Because you know everything about me, so you must know he's with me, so you must be worried. And they say, yeah, we know about Kevin, but no, we're not worried. So again, even these scientists know that she has no attachment to Kevin and that the relationship is falling apart anyway, which I think is pretty freaking interesting, and Nora kind of goes along with it. But no, the question they have is they pose this hypothetical question to Nora that there's two babies, and one will grow up to cure cancer, but only if the other one dies. And so she asked Nora if she will kill the baby, saying that she doesn't have to kill the baby herself, all she has to do is nod. Now, Nora has follow-up questions like, will the death be, painful or quick and painless? And Dr. Becker responds, it will be quick and painless. She then asks if the babies are hers, and Dr. Becker says it's irrelevant. Nora fires back that if they want her to answer their fucking question, then it's not irrelevant. And so Dr. Eden says that they're not hers. And then Nora's answer is, Yes, if it will cure cancer, for sure I'll kill the baby. What's one more death? And then the scientists kind of look at each other and then start packing up. And Nora's like, oh, so that's it? Are we ready to proceed? And they're like, nope, we're not going to be proceeding any further. Thanks for your time. And they start to leave. This really angers Nora. And she goes chasing after them, screaming after them that they just want her money. And they're like, no, we don't want your money. We're not going to proceed any further. Goodbye. And they leave, and she chases their car down and bangs on the car, screaming at them. Now, first of all, this is making it very clear that Nora has no intention of busting them, that she has every intention of using the machine and going over to where her family departed, and that she's kind of lying to Kevin for sure, but maybe even lying to herself that she was trying to bust these scammers, because she actually, and maybe it was in this moment she realizes that she desperately wanted to use this machine, which is very interesting. Now, the other aspect to the scene is the hypothetical question about the baby, because what's interesting about this is in the previous episode, Kevin's father runs into this random guy in the desert who asks him if he would kill a baby to cure cancer, and when Kevin Sr. answers no, of course not, he says that's what I said, and then sets himself on fire. So that scene is implying, in retrospect with this episode, that that guy also tried to go through and use this machine and was denied. Now what's interesting is that he answered the exact opposite of what Nora answered and was still rejected, because he said that he would not kill the baby where Nora said she would, and yet they were both rejected. Now I was doing some research, and apparently there was someone who wrote an article that had a theory about what the correct answer that Dr. Eden and Dr. Becker were looking for, and the writers of this episode confirmed that that was a pretty good theory, that was pretty correct. And the correct answer, as they surmised, was I don't care. So either yes or no was an incorrect answer. The answer they were looking for was I don't care, because the whole point was to test their attachment to this reality, because their whole intention was to go into a different reality altogether, and so they should not care about what happens in this reality. They shouldn't care if a baby dies or if cancer is cured. None of that is. All that should be irrelevant to them, because they're about to go off where all the departed went anyway, so what difference does it make? And, you know, there's something far-fetched I find about this, because there's so many people who use this device already. Did they all answer I don't care? I don't know. And it seems like a silly way to test someone true intentions. Just because they want to go to where the departed one doesn't mean that they wouldn't care about killing babies or curing cancer. I mean, they still might care about that sort of thing, because those issues might exist to where they're going to. So I don't know if I quite agree with the writer's reasoning, if in fact this is the reasoning, but it certainly did make it pretty interesting. So, Kevin returns to the hotel room when Nora is already there, and she's upset. She's trying to get a hold of someone in the fraud agency that she works for to report this fraud, and she can't get a hold of them, and she starts cursing. But then Kevin walks in, and she greets him and sees that he has a, bloody forehead from when that guy kicked his ass, and asked what happened to him, and Kevin doesn't really answer, and asks her about what's going on. She says that that the people who invited her there to go to where the departed went refused to accept her and said she wasn't eligible, so she says she's going to burn them to the fucking ground. And Kevin's confused. He's like, well, I thought it was a scam. I thought they were going to take your money. She's like, yeah, it is a scam. They probably knew I was on to them. Now, she's reaching here. I think it's obvious to both her and Kevin, maybe it's not obvious to her because she's oblivious, but it's obvious to Kevin that she actually wants to go to where the party went, that she has no intention to report them for fraud. But then she sees that Kevin is, just looking out of sorts and out of it, and asks him if he's okay, and she insists that he can tell her anything, and he says, "No, I can't tell you anything because last time I told you everything, you handcuffed me to a bed and left me there." And then Nora explained that she didn't know how to handle the fact that he was seeing and talking to dead people. And then the look on Kevin's face tells Nora that it is happening again, and he's like, "Oh shit, it's happening again, who did you see?" But Kevin doesn't tell her, and instead insists that they need to call Lori, because he had promised Lori that they would call them both together when he returned to the hotel room. And then she's upset and says, "What, you told Lori about it? Like, you can't talk to me, but you can talk to Lori? Or did you tell Matt? Did he is gonna put it in his next fucking book?" And then Kevin gets upset and says he doesn't like the book. He doesn't care about the book. It's not his book. And Nora argues back that she thinks that he loves being the center of the attention, that he wants to be Jesus Christ Superstar. And then Kevin answers, "I like the book. I fucking love it. It's riveting." He says it as he violently snatches it from her, rips the pages into the sink, and lights the whole book on fire, making it very clear that he does actually not care about the book. And he turns to Nora and he says, "There, the book is gone. Now we don't have to talk about it because that's what we do. We don't talk about anything." And then Nora says, "Well, what do you want to talk about?" And Kevin asks her back, "Well, what do you want to talk about?" And then she reaches back. They're obviously in a very sort of upset and frantic state, and she wants to be totally truthful. And she asks him, "Why didn't you stop me?" And he asks for clarification. She clarifies that why didn't he stop her from giving away their adopted baby. And then she says she accuses him of being happy that the baby was gone, and asks him why the hell he wanted to have another baby, which is something that he proposed. And then he fires back, "Why, are you afraid you're going to give that one away too?" Which, again, you can see how they're both really upset, and they're both starting to hit some really raw nerves. And then he gets right in her face and tells her that she doesn't want to have a baby. She wouldn't have a baby because that would mean that she's okay. That would mean she has moved on from her family disappearing, and she can't move on from it. And he says that she lost them and she needs to move on, but she fires back that they're not dead. She didn't lose them. They're just gone. And he just very calmly retorts, "Well, why don't you go be with them then?" Then he gets his bag, walks out of the room, and leave, while, mind you, the book that he set on fire is still burning very wildly in the kitchen sink. And after he leaves, the fire sets off the fire alarms. And Nora just sits there, shaking, being so upset after Kevin just left her. She just grabs a cigarette, sits on the bed, and starts smoking while there's a freaking fire raging in the hotel room. This is, again, as I said, this is the most intense breakup scene in any show ever. I can't think of a single breakup scene that is as charged, as intense, and just fucking raw as this one is. It really shows, as I was saying, the whole point of the episode was to show how their relationship was deteriorating, and neither one of them was willing to face it. And they both went off to face their own certain demons, where Kevin faces demons about seeing a dead person who didn't believe in the concept of family, while Nora went off to so-called expose these scammers, but really she just wanted to go where the departed went because she just can't let go of the fact that she lost her kids all those years ago. And so they both had to confront, the fact that they never talk to each other, the fact that the relationship is deteriorating, and they're both in a very upset and raw state due to their various own adventures, and so it just comes out in the worst possible way. And the fact that Kevin loses his temper a bit. It says lights a boat go on fire and leaves it in the sink. If I remember the show correctly, I think Matt had another copy of that book, or maybe he didn't. That's why he was freaked out when it was destroyed. But either way, it was an original, like, handwritten book. It wasn't like, something that was tons of copies lying around. So ripping it apart and lighting it on fire is actually kind of a big deal. And the fact that Nora would just sit there and smoke a cigarette while her hotel room was on fire kind of speaks to her state of mind. But so overall, yes, the most intense breakup scene I can ever think of is fucking riveting, as Kevin would say. So Kevin goes outside to grab a taxi to go to the airport and return home, but there's a lot of commotion. Well, you think it's from the fire alarm, but the person at the stand says that there's no taxis and tells him about, the explosion, and Kevin doesn't really know what he's talking about. And then his father pulls up in a van. And he pulls up, driven by Grace, the person he met in the previous episode, and goes up to him and explains that he saw him on the morning show and couldn't believe his eyes, and so looked him up and found that he was there, and was there to help him. And he asks if he's alone, and Kevin says yes, making it clear that he no longer considers himself with Nora, so now that he is alone. And then Kevin's father hugs him and says, "You're not alone anymore," and asks where he's going. He says to the airport, and Kevin Sr. explains that all planes are grounded, that he can't go anywhere. Now, this is referring to something that they show at the start of the next episode, that because there's the 7th anniversary of departure is coming up, and many people believe this to be the end of the world, including Kevin Sr., but then other people for different reasons. There's one such person in a French submarine sets off a nuclear explosion in the Pacific, and that's why all flights and everything get grounded because of that. And so that's why he can't return, but Kevin Sr. says, you can come with me, introduces him to Grace. Now, Grace, as we know, has her own purposes for wanting Kevin. They're basically both using him. They claim to be, you're here with family, you're not alone, we love you, this is great, but really they both want to use him because she was been searching for this Kevin. In fact, she killed a police chief because she thought it was that Kevin that is able to travel to the afterlife, because she wants him to travel to the afterlife to find out what happened to her kids who died. Kevin Sr., of course, wants to use him to go to the afterlife to find the magical song he needs to sing to save the world, because, he's insane. So it has a really ominous sort of feel to it. It's like, because on the surface it seems like, we're all happy, what a great place for him. But really, Kevin's just falling into the hands of two people who want to use him, basically want to kill him and use him for their own purposes. Now, and the song "Take on Me" starts playing. As I said, there's a montage with that song throughout the episode, and we see Nora back in her hotel room, is still smoking when the sprinkler system turns on and starts drenching her, and all the electricity starts turning off, and she doesn't move. She just sits there and does nothing as the water drips all over her, sort of explaining her state of mind, how she feels empty inside and doesn't feel like moving and has no reason to go anywhere. So overall, this is a really dark, a really dark, and I don't know if I'd go as far as to say disturbing or depressing, but almost like this is just a really dark episode, and it hides it or contrasts that, I should say, with a very bright surface level appearance. Like the coloring for most of this episode's bright. They're in Australia, and we see a guy in the panda bear suit walking around, and we see the chipper "Good Day Melbourne" show where everyone's all happy, and this episode's even named after that, and so it has like this happy name, but really. And it has that song, the Aha song, that's really happy and chipper and take on, like really like upbeat, but really it's a dark episode about this relationship that's falling apart, and Kevin and Nora, both their personal lives individually are falling apart in different ways, and that leads to the relationship falling apart. But then it has a really ominous ending as well, where Nora is completely frozen because she has no purpose to do anything whatsoever, and she realizes that she's let the grief of the loss of her kids control her life, and there's nothing she wants to do now other than go to the other side, go in this machine that she's pretty sure is a fraud that's just gonna kill her, but she doesn't care. She wants to take the chance to go and find out what happened to her kids. Well, meanwhile, Kevin, who was going somewhat insane and had what I believe is a psychotic break, ends up falling in the hands to his insane father, which is probably the last person he should deal with, who him and his other friend, who is kind of not working with the full loaded book, however you say, doesn't have all the tacos or whatever. But anyway, so she wants to use him for his own purposes, so he's falling into the hands of two people who just want to use him. So it's a very dark ending, and it is one of the most riveting, powerful, just intense episodes of any television series ever. So even though this may not be my favorite episode of The Leftovers, it is definitely an amazing episode and a perfect episode. So that's it for my perfect episode number 9. G'day Melbourne, The Leftovers. I shall be back, I believe, in 2 months to complete my perfect episode series. As I said, I'd be doing 10, so I got one final video left to do in this series, so please be sure to check that out. Also check out my channel as I cover many other shows like all things Star Trek, Better Call Saul, Westworld, Star Wars Rebels, The Expanse, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.